Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Multifamily Meetup. My name is Josh Geyer. I'm HUD's sector lead for the multifamily sector of the Better Buildings Challenge, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. A few housekeeping notes. Today's session will be recorded and archived on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. We'll follow up when the recording and slides are made available. Your audio lines are on mute. We ask that you remain on mute unless we call on you. If you experience any audio or visual issues at any time throughout today's session, please send a message in your chat window located on the bottom of your Zoom panel. Next slide. So let's look at our agenda today. First, I'll be walking us through our multifamily partners' progress in the Better Buildings Challenge this year and looking at some particularly innovative energy savings projects partners are implementing. Next, we'll hear from one of this year's challenge goal achievers, Kranti Malik from Bridge Housing. Then Ethan Handelman, HUD's Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Multifamily Housing, will give us an update on multifamily focused programs. And because we hope to make this a true meetup as much as possible, in the second half of the session, Michael Friedberg from HUD will be moderating an interactive discussion with Rood and Rebecca Schaaf on how we can build upon all the good work you're doing in energy efficiency to begin to set and achieve low carbon goals. We'll open up the discussion to your questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you. Next slide. To start hearing from you, we'll use an interactive platform called Slido. Please now go to www.slido.com using your mobile device or by opening a new window in your internet browser. Today's event code is #DOE. Once you enter this event code, please select today's session title. That's the Multifamily Meetup in the drop-down menu at the top right. The session title, as I said, Multifamily Meetup. To ask our panelists questions or to make comments, please submit them in Slido anytime throughout the discussion. You have the option to upvote other attendees' questions. Next slide. Just a bit about our upcoming multifamily summit sessions. We hope all of you can attend. Tomorrow is Unleashing the Power of Community Solar in Multifamily Buildings, and Wednesday is A New Frontier, Electrification in Multifamily Housing. And on Thursday, we have a workshop, Balancing the Benefits of Community Solar and Multifamily Housing. Please join us for all of these sessions. Next slide. So let's move on to the challenge and some of the highlights of what our multifamily partners have worked on this year. Next slide. So the Better Buildings Challenge multifamily sector is comprised of 92 partners with properties all over the country, the vast majority of which are affordable housing providers. Next slide. Almost half, 43%, of the more than 712,000 housing units owned or managed by our partners are public housing, as our partners include seven of the 10 largest public housing authorities in the country. Partners who own or manage multifamily assisted housing account for 35% of our sector's housing units, and the remaining 22% represent market rate housing. Next slide. We call participating housing organizations partners because we view the program as a true partnership. Partners commit to the overarching goal of the challenge, which is to reduce their energy use portfolio-wide by 20% over 10 years. They also commit to sharing energy data with us annually and to sharing their stories of how they achieved their goals with the public. For our part, HUD and DOE commit to partners by providing technical assistance in utility benchmarking in other areas, by connecting partners to their peers in the program, folks that might be facing the same barriers and can learn from each other, and also connecting with subject matter experts to solve problems. We also provide national recognition of our partners' leadership in energy efficiency and sustainability. Next slide. To help all multifamily housing organizations benchmark their utility usage, whether or not they're partners, HUD has created a number of key tools on the HUD Exchange that we want to make sure you know about. One is the Multifamily Utility Benchmarking Toolkit on screen now, which has a step-by-step guide to benchmarking. An increasing number of cities and states require benchmarking. The toolkit includes a wealth of information that can be used to meet those requirements. To check it out, use the search term HUD Utility Benchmarking Toolkit. Next slide. Another key resource is the Multifamily Energy and Water Efficiency Resource Library on the HUD Exchange. You can find it by searching for HUD and Better Buildings. Next slide. So what is the state of our multifamily program at this point in time? The program is doing great. Our partners have achieved 21 trillion BTUs in cumulative savings since the start of the program in 2013, and nearly 200 million in cumulative cost savings. This is across 712,000 housing units and 675 million square feet. Next slide. This chart illustrates cumulative cost savings since the start of the program for all partners successfully reporting energy data to the program, broken out by public housing, assisted housing, and or called mixed housing, a mix of market rate and assisted housing. Based on this, our partners saved an estimated $200 million in avoided energy costs in 2020. Next slide. One of the core functions of the multifamily sector is providing technical assistance to help partners overcome multiple barriers to benchmarking their property's energy usage. This slide shows total numbers of partners in gray and the numbers that have successfully benchmarked their properties in green. This year, despite enormous operational challenges during a global pandemic, 70% of our partners succeeded in benchmarking their portfolios and sharing their data with our program. Next slide. This chart shows the total number of housing units in the program in dark blue and the units that were successfully benchmarked shown in light blue. This resulted in over 400,000 housing units energy data being benchmarked in 2020, the most data we've ever collected in the sector. Next slide. At the end of last year, we formed the first Better Buildings Multifamily Steering Committee to ensure the program activities are responsive to the needs of multifamily partners. The list of committee members who've stepped up is here, led by our steering committee chair, Rood of Mercy Housing, who we're going to be hearing from later in this session. We're really grateful to those of you who have volunteered to participate. Next slide. Our partners are participating in 2 pilots through the Better Buildings program. The low carbon pilot launched this year. DOE is working with partners to show, it is shown here to demonstrate real world pathways to achieve low carbon emissions from buildings. Each partner has committed to working on at least 2 low carbon projects over the next 2 years and to share those solutions with the market. The waste reduction pilot launched in 2020 as well. The partners on the right are working with DOE to set, track, and meet a waste reduction goal. Next slide. A critical part of the program is not just doing the great energy efficiency work that you do, it's also that as leaders in your field, you share your stories and replicate strategies with your multifamily housing peers. So we ask all partners to publish case studies about their approach to portfolio-wide savings. Here are the case studies partners published this year. Overall, our partners have published nearly 100 case studies on the Better Building Solutions Center. It's searchable by topic or barrier. We encourage everyone to check them out. Next slide. Now I'd like to spotlight a few outstanding projects that demonstrate innovative leadership in high-performance buildings. The first is Wind Company's Eva White Apartments, an affordable housing property for seniors in Boston, Massachusetts. Wind Companies won a grant through DOE's ABC initiative to demonstrate a replicable approach to zero energy ready retrofits in affordable housing. This project is still in the design phase, but will include a building envelope with prefabricated components built in the passive house standard, replacing the gas boiler with electric variable refrigerant flow heat pumps, a central energy recovery ventilator, converting gas domestic hot water to central heat pump system, and LED lighting, industrial cooking, and Energy Star appliances. You can learn more about this project at the summit's Wednesday, May 19th session called Easy as ABC, How Advanced Building Construction Creates Efficient, Affordable, and Appealing Solutions for Low Carbon Buildings. Next slide. Due to COVID-19, this year's multifamily building operators have been challenged as never before. This next project demonstrates the approach of one partner, Cambridge Housing Authority, took to improving indoor air quality generally and reducing the risk of COVID to their senior residents. Cambridge installed new high-efficiency heating cooling units with fan coils and integrated energy recovery ventilator, or ERV, within each unit. They also installed UV lighting in the fan coils, which aims to inactivate airborne microorganisms according to ASHRAE guidance. They increased the outside airflow rate 30 to 50% by increasing CFM fan speeds, and they installed higher level MERV air filters in common areas and offices. Across the whole senior housing portfolio, Cambridge installed 200 HEPA air filters in common areas. Next slide. This next project by Jonathan Rose Companies is expected to be the largest passive house complex in the United States when it's completed. Sendero Verde in East Harlem will have 709 units of 100% affordable housing, with 30% of the units for extremely low-income renters, including the formerly homeless. The company expects to end energy savings of 60 to 70% compared to buildings of a similar size in the city. Energy conservation measures include a virtually airtight facade, variable refrigerant flow heating cooling system with individual units, and a highly efficient and centralized energy recovery ventilation system. There will be an optimized hot water recirculation system to reduce hot water heating and cooling loads. And finally, the team expects about 20% of common area energy needs to be met by solar arrays. Next slide. Finally, Standard Companies recently completed a comprehensive LEED certified enterprise green communities rehab of Fort Chaplain apartments in Washington, D.C. The campus of 45 buildings has a 1.3 megawatt community solar system. Participating residents are expected to see a utility savings of 50% over the next 15 years, or up to $500 per year in savings. The main energy conservation measures included HVAC split systems with a SEER of 15.75 and an AFUE of 96%, 96% efficient gas-fired water heaters, Energy Star appliances and LED lighting, high efficiency insulated windows. And the project features a green roof on the community building and roof coatings to reduce heat island effects. Next slide. Now let's transition to talk about our Better Buildings Challenge goal achievers. Next slide. The highlight of our year is celebrating the success of our goal achievers. In the past, we've celebrated 9 multifamily goal achievers listed here. These are partner organizations who have achieved 20% or more energy savings across their housing portfolios. They have faced daunting challenges and have led the industry in finding solutions. Next slide. This year, we're celebrating Cleveland Housing Authority in Cleveland, Tennessee, which achieved 21% energy savings across 420 public housing units through HVAC replacements, LED conversions, air sealing, hot water efficiency upgrades, and solar PV. Cleveland, unfortunately, could not be with us today. Next slide. We're also happy to be celebrating Bridge Housing's goal achievement this year. Kranti Malik from Bridge is with us today and will provide more details on their impressive achievement of 9% average annual energy savings, which is equivalent of 49% cumulative energy savings since their baseline of 2010. Very, very impressive. Next slide. Take it away, Kranti.
Thank you, Jaws.
No, let me. Let me introduce you, Kranti, before you start. Kranti Malik is a senior portfolio and sustainability associate with Bridge Housing. Kranti leads energy efficiency, water conservation, solar, EV infrastructure, and battery storage projects for Bridge's portfolio across California, Oregon, and Washington State. Thank you, Kranti. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to start my presentation by sharing a little bit about Bridge Housing. Bridge Housing was established in 1983. We do real estate development, property, asset, and portfolio management. And until now, Bridge has participated in the development of more than 18,000 homes. And currently we have 12,300 homes under property and asset management across California, Oregon, and Washington. Next slide, please. So why Bridge decided to participate in Better Buildings Challenge? Since we were already participating in Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future's Challenge Big Reach, it made sense to also commit to BBC's challenge. And of course, an important factor and the main driving force behind the decision was to save on energy consumption and save on overall utility expense, which would be better for the properties and better for the environment as well. Next slide. So what steps did we take to achieve our goals? And it's never a straightforward path, but I would like to highlight some of the main solutions we deployed and some of the necessary steps I think will help others as well. To begin with, we contracted with an energy management platform. In our case, we use Yardi Energy Management to properly track data and monitor utility usage throughout the year. Around the same time, we also created our profile in EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Next slide, please. Another very helpful step that was taken, that we developed was something called the Green Maintenance Guide, which basically included several different guides and the protocols around installing energy efficiency appliances, LED lighting standards, annual in-unit inspection, and such. And these are just some of the examples, and I have listed down some different protocols under the main protocol. We provided presentations to the property staff member to fully inform about the newly adopted greening protocols. So whenever, for example, lighting has to be replaced at a property, then the property staff can use the lighting standard guide to install the appropriate LED lighting, choosing the appropriate color, temperature, Kelvin levels, etc. Another example would be staff using the in-unit inspection protocol to check the low flow rate of the shower heads, faucet, aerators, toilet flow, etc. Next slide, please. So here, we're finally now getting towards the active work around energy efficiency. We conducted many energy efficiency retrofits using different types of funding from state and local level rebates like BAREN, SoCalREN, PG&Es, MOB PG&Es, ESACAM is the most recent example. And these are just a few examples, but there are so many that we utilize. In other cases, if a property could not afford to pay for the retrofit, we completed those as well using funding from the property. Besides the full scale of energy efficiency retrofit, I really want to stress on the ongoing operations and maintenance at a property where a number of times property staff would change the appliances and lighting on their own. And that's where the greening guides come in pretty handy. A good practice here I would recommend is reminding your property staff annually about the guides or any protocols that you may have taken place. In our case, we do this quarterly, and that's because we are also, as I mentioned, part of the Big Reach Challenge, which asks us to report on any greening changes that has taken place at a property. So we use that as an segue to ask what changes were done at the property, but also help us track some of the greening efforts that we may have missed. So that helps track all the actions taken on the property management side. So what else? So these are some of the few highlighted examples. There's so many I'm pretty sure other developers has taken. So what's moving forward now that we have achieved this? We are continuing to conduct energy efficiency retrofit. We are looking to install solar on additional 34 of our properties using SOMA funding. We are in the middle of installing our first EV charging plugs at one of our properties. And we'll also be using SGIP program to fund battery storage projects at our properties. Next slide, please. I wanted to share a case study, a property of ours, Steamboat Point, which is located in San Francisco, that went under an energy efficiency retrofit in late October 2019. The scope of work included 3 new efficient domestic hot water boilers, variable speed pump on domestic hot water recirculation loop, low flow aerators in the kitchen and the bathrooms, and the low flow shower heads. We also did a full LED retrofit for all existing lamps. And that resulted in an outstanding energy use reduction of 42% and the cost reduction 36%. We used local incentives, so half of the incentives were provided, and half of the cost of the project was provided through the incentive, and half was paid by the property itself. So just a great example of using the local incentives and using the funds that are available in the property can save you a lot. And one point I want to make here is, which my supervisor pointed out and actually recommended, if we can have the energy efficiency, scope of work and the budget already built in the budget seasons, that really helps somebody like in my position to utilize the money available at the property to complete these projects. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. I would really like to encourage folks to join the session on balancing the benefit of community solar, where alongside one of my colleagues, we'll be discussing SOMA on a deeper level and solar on overall. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kranti. And just a hearty congratulations to you and everyone at Bridge Housing. I know you folks are an awesome organization. You're leaders in this field. We'll now hear from Ethan Handelman. Ethan was appointed by President Biden as HUD's Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Multifamily Housing, which administers FHA's multifamily mortgage insurance program and oversees more than 23,000 assisted properties. Prior to joining HUD, Ethan was a senior policy analyst at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, overseeing the affordable housing activities of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. Before that, Ethan was a vice president for policy and advocacy at the National Housing Conference, finishing his time as acting CEO. Just a reminder, you can enter your questions for Kranti and Ethan in Slido. Go ahead, Ethan. Thank you for appearing here.
Well, thanks for having me. It is a real treat to be here. I frankly love this stuff. You know, not just the big picture, but also the building envelope and the deep dive into the lighting and the water savings. This is stuff I've been paying attention to for a long time, and I'm really glad to be sharing the stage with, virtually that is, with so many folks who are doing great work here. Part of that is that responding to climate change is a priority for the Biden-Harris administration, and HUD's climate goals are a big part of that work. So I'll talk to you a little bit about kind of the big picture perspective from HUD. And happy to dive in during the Q&A period. I'm sure many of you know that in January, President Biden established the National Climate Task Force, and that task force facilitates planning and implementation of key federal actions to reduce climate pollution. It's led by the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, and Secretary Fudge is a member of the task force. The administration has set ambitious goals to decrease emissions, reduce utility costs, and increase the indoor air quality. This will be seen in our work with the housing that HUD touches through subsidy, through grant, mortgage insurance programs. A lot of that's in multifamily, not all of it, but quite a bit of it touches other programs. But at HUD, big picture, we're part of shaping the built environment, and we should do that in a very forward-looking way. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this work. Part of that is also making sure we're supporting property and community resilience to ensure that assisted and insured properties, especially the people who live there, are prepared for the extreme weather events and natural disasters that we know can come. And that'll be an increased focus of our sustainability. Natural disasters disrupt the day-to-day life of Americans, often making it impossible for people to stay in their homes. And that's a pain felt all too sharply during this pandemic. Multifamily created a temporary disaster response team to help with the dozens of storms, floods, and fires over the last few years. We're in the process of building on that initial effort. A lot of that is kind of internal process stuff for us, but it's designed to help us be more efficient and effective in our response. The administration is working on sustainability and resilience work that increases equity and environmental justice. Just as an example, the president's budget blueprint included an $800 million request across HUD programs to rehabilitate public and affordable housing and provide energy efficiency upgrades. Already in the works at multifamily, there's good stuff that I hope many of you know about, but if you don't, definitely check it out. We have our Green MIP mortgage insurance program. That's $40 billion in originations since the program was introduced in 2016, ensuring that almost all new construction and much of the rehab being done under FHA programs meets the certification standards of one of several recognized independent green building standards. We're also working with industry to implement CPACE and have published some guidance to support it. And we've implemented the CNA, that's the Capital Needs Assessment e-tool revision 3.0, which is the web-based version of our property assessment tool. That includes an energy audit component and assesses the costs and benefits of more efficient building component replacements. The Better Buildings Challenge, and this is why I'm so excited to be with all of you, has brought together hundreds of multifamily and public housing owners who made this voluntary commitment to achieve energy efficiency and improvement goals in exchange for, frankly, just modest incentives from us, right? This is you guys pursuing the work that you care about, and the incentives are important, but I recognize they are a small piece of the puzzle. We have plans to expand and enhance the program. The BDC has been a program where some of the most responsible and forward-looking property owners have come together to share best practices. These properties and the models they show prove where and how targeted investments and management can save resources in the long term. You all have served as models for other HUD programs and properties and the broader housing market. So we want to find ways to expand that. and expand participation in the BBC to find ways to incentivize and reward the highest performers, and to help all the other participants in our programs make improvements using the BBC approaches. So we look to the participants here today as a source of ideas, inspiration, leadership. I hope you will take today and the sessions to come as an opportunity, and the work to come as an opportunity to show us how to make a difference on this challenge, because it's real focus. So thank you again for having me, and looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts.
Thank you, Ethan. We're now going to take questions from attendees from me, Kranti, and Ethan. Again, please go to your Slido app at slido.com and use today's event code, #DOE. Once you enter this event, select Multifamily Meetup and drop down menu at the right. Then you'll be able to enter your questions or comments, or upvote other attendees' questions that you like. So to start us out, we had a really good question for Ethan. This person is excited about turnkey solutions. What's the next phase in grassroots capacity building in the multifamily sector to really scale these solutions up across housing portfolios?
So it is a great question. I think the two sort of immediate opportunities for scaling up, and this isn't specific to turnkey opportunities, although that is potentially an element of a lot of retrofit work. The two big opportunities for scaling up, one is the budget request, right? I talked about the budget blueprint. You know, when the full budget comes out, you will certainly see more detail in that. That's what it's designed to do. The other is the American Jobs Plan. And there is a lot of resources that potentially could flow from that. Both of those are aiming at more scale. BBC has been great as a way to build knowledge and build capacity and show what can work. We all know that it takes resources to scale things up. And so those are where I'm looking for resources to come to really make a big difference.
Great. So the next question is for Kranti. Kranti, what is involved in training your maintenance staff in the Green Guide? Is staff turnover a problem in implementing the guide?
Good question. Like I mentioned, the way we do it, and I think it's a reminder more than, a training, that every time that I send out quarterly emails asking for the greening, implementation they have done on their own, whether it's switching out, incandescent lighting to LEDs or just water restriction conservation around that. Everything has, in my experience, has reminding them to use the guide. I think a good point that is brought in question is that how do you actually maintain the staff turnover? And again, over and over, reminding the property supervisor to utilize the guide when they have their meetings with new staff, I think is very helpful. It could be a reminder in your meetings that you guys might have, as a company meeting or just a departmental meeting. Keep on bringing up the guide. I think it will be a very useful tool.
Thanks, Kranti. So there was one question that I can take pretty quickly. How can multifamily organizations join the challenge? My contact information, I believe, is going to be at the end of this, at the presentation. But if it is not, you can email me at joshua.m.geyer@hud.gov, and I will talk with you on how to get in the challenge if that's what your organization wants. So next question is for Ethan. Ethan, what is HUD's thinking about expanding benchmarking to the whole inventory of HUD-assisted housing?
That's a great question, because I think there is real potential for making gains by expanding benchmarking. This is one of the areas where I think, we think about sort of two prongs on this. One is think about the BBC, right? Encouraging the high performers to be the highest performers and sort of push the envelope and figure out the ways to really reduce the climate impact of the built environment, and simultaneously make people safer and healthier when they live in the stuff that we build and finance. The other part is trying to get everyone up to that same standard, or just closer to it. And benchmarking is a tool for that. I don't want to make previews of anything you might see in the budget or the AJP in terms of details, but certainly benchmarking is a tool that could be incorporated in that sort of.
Thanks, Ethan. I feel like I am very, very excited, as I think many people are, to see what we come out with on that front, because God knows it's needed. So another one for Ethan, is HUD considering an integrated output and outcomes incentives for energy efficiency or generation across funding programs?
So I'm the first one to admit when I don't totally understand a question, and that's, I don't know what that framework is.
I'm not totally sure either.
I feel slightly better then.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is, like, they're asking, when are we gonna, I mean, I guess I would rephrase it as, Michael and I have, in the Office of Environment and Energy, have been talking about thinking about HUD's port in the same way that we encourage our partners to think about their entire portfolios when they're doing things. We think that HUD should be thinking about our entire portfolio, that 2.3 million physical units, and then a total with HCV, it's 4.5. Like, how can we think about, and benchmarking is a part of that, but maybe if there's more you can say kind of beyond benchmarking.
I see. Okay. So that's really helpful explication there. Certainly, I am looking for ways just within the Office of Multifamily to take a more comprehensive view of not just energy usage, but that's certainly a big part of it, but also exposure to natural disaster and climate risk. So some of that relies on just systems improvements and making sure that we have the data we need to take advantage of the other resources that are out there to map risk. And to assess progress on things like energy usage, water savings, that sort of stuff. So there's some amount if you want to talk about an integrated approach, some amount of it that depends on system development that we are working on, but it'll be a step-by-step process.
So I think the next one is the last one, and it's for Kranti. I think. So how can multifamily buildings leverage funds to subsidize the cost of new low GWP central heat pump water heaters?
Great and very technical question. I think that has to be dealt with, and I don't think I can fully answer this. That has to be dealt with your compliance senior leadership and also your other senior leadership to see how that can be related to subsidizing. I think, and if I understand the question right, is it, I just want to clarify the question whether if it's subsidizing for the tenants and then processing the cost towards them, or just how to utilize it and how to use the funding available. Because depending on the fundings, so for example, we have used a lot of local fundings. So far, I haven't seen a single subsidiary around domestic hot water. So maybe a little more clarification there, but I think that question will not specifically go to me, but it has to come through our compliance department also, if it's related especially to residents.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think we're going to be able to clarify that question, but it's good that it got out there. Okay, so I just want to, we're going to wrap up questions. I want to thank everyone for these great and very relevant questions. We're going to move on now to the second part of the program, an interactive discussion on building upon all this great work in energy efficiency we've been hearing about, and building on it to then move to the next phase, which is achieving low carbon goals in multifamily housing. Our moderator for the discussion is Michael Friedberg, HUD's Senior Advisor to the multifamily sector of the Better Buildings Challenge. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Josh. Great discussion. Really appreciate hearing from both you about the progress that we've made and our partners have made through the challenge. And also from Kranti as the goal achiever, let me add my congratulations to yours. And then also hearing from Ethan Handelman about HUD's commitment to this agenda, which is obviously encouraging to all of us who are in this business. So just to move the discussion forward, for those of you who have attended our multifamily meetups in person, which hopefully we will do again one of these days, we try to focus on a topic of importance to our partners, one topic that we can have a somewhat in-depth discussion about. And we're going to try to replicate that today. Today's topic is making the transition from a focus on energy efficiency, which we and our partners have been pretty single-mindedly focusing on as over the past few years, to low or zero carbon building. You'll be hearing a lot over the next few days about the low carbon pilot that DOE has launched, and that includes, as you pointed out, Josh, several multifamily partners who are part of that and who are committing to moving and demonstrating how that can be done in a couple of buildings in their portfolio. And we're really excited that the multifamily family is part of the low carbon pilot. As Ethan mentioned also, of course, the administration is focused very heavily on looking towards low carbon goals in the building sector as a whole. I think there was a Biden campaign pledge to a 50% carbon reduction by 2035. And there'll be a roundtable this afternoon with some of the leading members, cabinet secretaries from many agencies on this subject. So I certainly encourage those of you who are interested in this to join that session. But I think the question for us today is, what is it going to take for us as a sector to reimagine our buildings, both on the retrofit side and the new construction side, as zero or low carbon buildings? So we're going to have a good discussion on that. We've invited a couple of our leading partners to lead us in this discussion, but I thought I'd just start with a definition, and there are multiple definitions, but what do we mean by a zero carbon building? So just for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to define a zero carbon building as one that is highly energy efficient, produces on-site or procures carbon-free renewable energy in an amount sufficient to offset the annual carbon emissions associated with operations. So I think we're probably going to be mostly focusing on operational carbon emissions here, not so much on the embodied carbon side for the purposes of today's discussion, although clearly that has to be part of the conversation as well. So I think before we get to our discussion, we wanted you actually to go to Slido. And we have a Slido poll question for those of you who haven't yet opened this, www.slido.com. Open a window, and we have a poll question for you, which is, which of these carbon reduction strategies have you implemented or have plans to implement in your portfolio? So have you electrification, transit-oriented development, on-site renewables, efficiency retrofits? Everybody's done efficiency, so we'd be interested in which of additional measures you might have taken. So it looks like we're seeing significant number of you are either implementing or would like to implement on-site renewables, electrification, EVs, charging stations, and at least on my screen, off-site renewables doesn't show up. So I guess the next question should be which of you actually implemented versus which of these you'd like to implement, but clearly there is an interest in all of the above. So let's move on. Thank you for that response, and keep in mind that we encouraging you to enter your questions in Slido, so keep that screen going. And we definitely want to have a discussion and hear from all of you after we've heard from our two guest speakers. So let me introduce our panelists. First, we're joining us is Caitlin Rood. Caitlin is Mercy Housing's National Environmental Sustainability Director and is also the chair of our newly formed Multifamily Better Buildings Steering Committee. She's an environmental engineer with more than 20 years of sustainability experience, and under her leadership, Mercy Housing became a goal achiever last year with a 24% energy savings over 10 years. So we're great to have you with us, Caitlin. Also joining us is Becky Schaaf. And Becky, as many of you know, is the Senior Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at SAFE, the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, where she works with a network of multifamily housing providers with about 140,000 units of affordable housing. And I see here that she worked extensively abroad in China, Russia, and the Ukraine as part of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory's Global Research Program. So hopefully we're getting some of that international experience, Becky, here in the US. So I'm going to start the discussion. We're going to have a few questions for our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. The first question is for Becky, and Becky, the question is, what's the difference when considering reducing energy consumption versus carbon emissions reduction? Is there a difference in the way we need to be thinking and conceptualizing this work?
Thanks, Michael. And great question. Yeah, there is some different thinking that we need to start looking at as we move towards thinking about emissions reductions. As you said, efficiency comes first with all of these programs. So all of the kinds of actions we've been taking to reduce energy for the Better Buildings Challenge, things like weatherization, high performance envelopes, efficient equipment and appliances, green O&M that keep things running, working with residents on their energy consumption. All of these are core and super important work to reducing the amount of energy that we consume. But as we switch to thinking about how we get to zero carbon, we need to also be thinking about the reality that we'll still be using some energy. And what we need is for that energy to be clean energy without carbon emissions. This means generating some of our own energy on site, participating in community solar programs like we'll hear about later this week, or signing up for clean electricity programs. It also means realizing that our electricity use on site is pretty much the only energy that has the potential to be clean energy, and switching away from using natural gas or other fossil fuels towards electrification, like we'll hear about on Wednesday. And then the last piece that we have to start thinking about a little bit differently is that when thinking about emissions, when you're using electricity matters. It's really the electric utilities that are charged with being the ones of cleaning up the electricity supply. But as they do that, they're going to need customers to consume energy at times when the renewable energy supply is most available. So this means things like developing strategies for preheating or pre-cooling rooms, using smart water heaters that can automatically shift their loads, or even simpler solutions like smart thermostats. So how we get at these kinds of measures is probably going to be very similar to how we've gone about energy efficiency work, but the kinds of measures we'll be implementing are shifting a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a great start to the discussion. I think when I think of this transition, this whole challenge of time of day use and shifting to off-peak use to maximize renewables and electrical consumption is the sort of key shift, one of the key shifts that we need to make. So maybe we'll get back to that in the next part of the discussion. But I wanted to get Caitlin into the discussion with maybe a definitional question. You know, we hear a lot about different types of carbon emissions, and different programs have different requirements. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 carbon emissions. So we thought it would be helpful if you just set the table perhaps, and you know, what's the difference, what are they, and what do we need to be thinking about and focusing on when we're looking at multifamily buildings? So,
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Thank everyone for being here today. Yeah, as we're shifting from this concept of energy efficiency to greenhouse gas emissions, and we start talking scope 1, 2, and 3, I've been in a lot of settings where this is new language. So we thought we would kind of start with the basics about what are scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So at a really high level, scope 1 are the direct emissions that come from your organization or your properties. So we're talking about emissions that are happening actually in the building. So we're talking about things like gas-fired boilers, gas-fired heat pump water heaters, air conditioning leaks, that sort of thing. Then when we start talking about scope 2 emissions, we're talking about the electricity that you purchase, because there are emissions associated with the generation of that power, and that is being generated in order for your property to consume it. So for a power plant, their emissions are scope 1, but for the users of the energy, that's a scope 2 emission. And then there's the scope 3 emissions, and these are the largest emissions of all of the emissions for our sources, and they're all the indirect emissions from activities from sources we don't own or control. So this could be things like business travel, employee commute, procurement of products, your waste generation, resident commutes and their access to public transit. And something that Michael mentioned that we wouldn't really get into today, but is in here, is the embodied carbon of our buildings. So scope 1 and 2 are largely captured if you're capturing your portfolio-wide energy consumption for the Better Buildings Challenge. Scope 1 and 2 are captured already, at least the information needed to calculate those. Scope 3, however, is not, and that information is harder to gather, but really important because it is so much of our inventory. There are a number of protocols out there for capturing this information. I think kind of the primary biggest name ones would be from the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They have a greenhouse gas protocol that defines all of these scopes and how exactly, very specifically, one gathers and reports on those for various emissions. In addition, EPA has a carbon inventory page, and following this session, we will send out a variety of links to some of the things that we've been talking about, and the links to both of those will be included as resources. One thing we would like everybody to think about and maybe comment on in Slido is whether anybody that's here today are collecting and reporting on these scopes in any formal way, particularly if you've moved to scope 3. And I'm also interested to know if anyone has science-based targets in their carbon emissions inventories. So if anybody has anything interesting to say on that, we'd love to hear that in Slido. Thanks, Michael.
what do you mean by science-based information? Isn't this all science-based?
Right, but sometimes people just select a goal, like we're going to reduce by 20%, but then there are ways of calculating using a specific method to determine what the target should be.
Great, great, great. Just one quick other follow-up question. Do you know if any of, we know about local law 97, I believe, in New York that has a carbon goal. California, I think, has got some low carbon targets. Do you know if those typically include scope 3 or those are off the table for the most part when we're looking at zero carbon targets?
I don't know the answer. I don't have any
Okay.
properties in New York, and I'm not clear about that in California. Becky, maybe you know more.
Let's hear from our friends in New York during the Q&A. So I thought it might be interesting just to hear from you both about your own organization's actions or activities in this space. What low carbon activities are you now pursuing? Do you have a low carbon goal? And why would you consider a low carbon goal if you haven't already set one? And maybe Becky, I know you've been working with your board on this, so maybe you can start us off on that question.
Absolutely. So the SAFE members have been pursuing low carbon activities, and it's something that SAFE has been kind of promoting and helping to facilitate along the way. So we've been doing some of these strategies as part of our energy efficiency work, or as an extension of it. We see a lot of growing opportunity around renewables with prices coming down, with community solar opportunities arising in more and more states. And certain utility programs, which is one of the main ways that we fund retrofits, are incentivizing fuel switching or things like smart appliances at this point. It's just starting. So I would say, as I think about all those check marks that we got to put at the beginning, things are happening, but at different scales. So the strategies aren't that intimidating. I think we can do this work. But we are going through a process for what does setting a goal look like. And one thing that complicates it is that the clean energy supply and the electricity sector really varies dramatically in different parts of the country. So it's hard to set expectations around kind of where that is headed and account for regional variations with, our members having properties in different parts of the country. We also definitely do not have good tools for measuring the time of use impacts. We're all kind of calculating this off of our monthly electricity use and not on a kind of super fine basis about when we're using energy. And then the last piece that's a little bit challenging is the prospect of baselining those scope 3 emissions. So as Caitlin mentioned, we have a methodology for scopes 1 and 2 that's already available in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's maybe not perfect, but it's, a good base to start from. Around scope 3, we might take a different approach than setting a percentage reduction target and come up with some set of actions that we commit to taking around scope 3. So thinking about a slightly less quantitative approach to tackling those emissions.
Well, that's great. We're looking to SAFE being a leader here. You've been a leader on the efficiency front, so we're expecting great things. Caitlin, did you have anything that you wanted to talk about as far as Mercy Housing is concerned?
Sure, we're right in line there with what Becky was talking about. Largely, Mercy Housing is looking at the economic bottom line, dealing with split incentives that we saw a number of differently phrased questions in the earlier session with Ethan this morning. So those are definitely things that are facing our organization, and watching regulations evolve with regard to electrification and incentives. Mercy Housing did replace all in one fell swoop under a under a contract with a pay from savings contract with Affordable Community Energy Services Company, and then Bright Power as the implementer. In 2017, we switched 6 properties to electric heat pump water heaters. 2017 was really early days in the United States for doing that kind of work. So we've had some very notable success in that. One property that 4 years in has a continued 67% energy consumption reduction as a result of that shift. And we've also experienced some challenges that we're learning as we go. So we're continuing to look for where this makes economic sense and where the guidelines are pushing us and regulations, and certainly advocating for good environmental work that makes good economic sense. And that's kind of where Mercy Housing is standing on that. And then working with the SAFE group that guides us so much in the work we do.
Great, great. So you've got your toe and dipped your toe in the water, it sounds like, with some success. Good to hear. So back to Becky, what is the business case that needs to be made, or you have tried to make for your board when you're talking about net zero in affordable buildings? How do you get your board of directors, your executive directors on board, so to speak?
Sure. So, I mean, getting our board on board starts with thinking about, the why. We get to the business case, but we do start with that big picture why. I think we all in this room know that climate change and turning the corner on climate change is the challenge of the decade. And it's something that's going to need everybody on board to make this transition. It's also true that it sometimes sounds like something charitable we're doing for future generations or someone in some other part of the world. But I think as affordable housing providers in the US, we know that that's really not true, that it's things that are happening today, things that are happening in our communities, directly affecting the properties, the assets we own, and the residents of our buildings, that they are affected by heat waves, by water intrusion as rivers flood. This is happening now, and it's impacting us. So the solutions to climate change are kind of not some lofty theoretical goal. It's a way of helping ourselves. But getting to more of kind of the dollars and cents perspective that I think you were asking about, I would say that a lot of these solutions are not especially more expensive to implement as part of a new construction or a major rehab. I think several people on the call have already mentioned passive house. We see a lot of potential there, and some market transformation happening there as well. So as our construction and architecture partners get more familiar with this, the kind of human cost of figuring it out goes down. So we also expect the policy environment to be shifting to emphasize these more high performance, low carbon buildings as well. Green building standards like LEED and Enterprise are already starting to address carbon emissions. And I expect things like financing incentives will shift their focus over time as well. The same is true on the utility program side. The kinds of things that we're going to be able to access through utility programs are going to shift from these efficiency measures towards things that promote cleaning up the grid, stabilizing the grid, helping utilities manage a highly renewable grid. So there's things that are driving us in this direction. The winds are shifting, and our being part of this transformation means that we'll be able to get some early experience and can help design these policies to be both effective and meet the affordability needs that are, entirely critical to affordable housing.
Great, thank you. I I have one last question, I think, for Caitlin, before we get to some Q's and A's, which is, what are the common barriers that you're likely to run into or that you've seen as you considered moving towards electrification or low carbon building?
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, there are a number of barriers that we're still experiencing, and I really appreciate that Becky said and want to reiterate how prevalent it is to me, the disproportionate impact of climate change on our community in particular, and how I feel and Mercy feels a responsibility toward our residents, and very supportive of working in that direction. But we do have a number of barriers that we need to overcome in the world of electrification. And they really fall into 4 main categories. Michael, this list, if you get to the point where you feel like we need to go to Q&A, that's totally fine. So I'll give the 4 main categories and try to keep it high level. But if we need to move to Q&A, please let me know. So the 4 categories are financial, technological, workforce, and grid related. On the financial side, we're talking about the fuel price, first of all, if gas is more expensive than electric or electric more expensive than gas, that ongoing cost is a significant factor. Whether or not we have the capital to implement to do the fuel switch, whether or not additional transformers would be needed at our property, and if we have the space and funds for that, and then whether or not fuel switching is even covered by incentive programs, because oftentimes the incentive programs will provide a more efficient gas boiler, say, but not the incentive to switch to a significantly more efficient electric system. So having incentive programs that address that fuel switch is critical. On the technology side, we're talking about in some instances, cutting edge and bleeding edge technology being implemented in our properties, or at least in the United States for the first time, and being willing to be involved in that is a decision that our properties need to make. Having the appropriate amount of backup power if the power goes down is a consideration. Specifically with heat pump water heaters, handling recirculation water has been something that we've had to figure out. That's different than heating the water that's coming in first. Putting in heat pumps in extreme cold situations, it sounds like that's getting better, and I definitely hear in some settings that that's solved, and in other settings that it's not quite solved yet. So making sure that these systems will operate in extreme cold. And then having the physical space to actually fit them in the property when you're talking about retrofits. I've definitely heard about properties where we actually don't have a way to get a big piece of equipment, say in an elevator down to the basement to do an electrification project. On the workforce side, we need to be developing contractors across the United States that have the qualifications to install and operate and maintain this equipment. This is kind of a big issue across the United States, not to mention being cognizant of taking care of the industry as we shift, say, making coal workers into people that are working on the solar side, or pipe fitters in gray water, or what we're going to do, but building up the contractor qualifications and workforce and not leaving segments of the community high and dry. That's both for installation and operation. And then lastly, on the grid side of things, the 4th point, we want to make sure that the grids have the capacity to handle this additional electric load. We're not really accustomed to and don't love having periods of no energy in this country. So we want to not make that worse. And is the grid clean? We don't want to move to all electric and then have that be a less environmentally preferable option. And lastly, if to the extent that the grid isn't clean and we're doing solar on our properties or in community solar, we need to have virtual net metering or VNEM available, which isn't in many locations, so that we can offset the use of our properties as well as that of our tenants, which of course also means we have to deal with the split incentive problem. So I think that's a good place to stop for there.
That is a great list. We're going to have, I assume we've captured that in the discussion somewhere. We need to put that out as a sort of a road. We have to address all of those points as we do our roadmap going forward. It sounds, I'm told that we do have time for at least one more question from our panelists. I'm going to go back to Becky. And if you could say a little bit more about the demand response strategies, and you were talking about smart meters and other automated information systems that are going to be needed to make this transition. You could say a few more words about that.
Great, sure. So I got into this a little bit when I was describing the low carbon strategies. But the really growing availability of connected devices and the so-called, Internet of Things is really blowing up what's possible from demand response. So utilities have always had programs they use where they pay customers to reduce their energy use at times of peak demand. For them, not needing to bring on another power plant is worth a lot of money. So as they manage more intermittent supplies, they're going to be looking for additional ways to drive down those peaks and kind of even out loads. And some of the things they'll be looking to do is things like incentivizing smart thermostats that, without your even noticing it, may set your thermostat back a degree or a couple of degrees at times when the grid needs a little demand reduction. Similarly, there's smart water heaters, so they can kind of automatically heat your tank of water at times and then turn off that if there's kind of a need to reduce demand. So there's technology things that are really seamless from the user perspective, don't require a lot of active energy management use that we can start moving to. And then there's also, the potential for more of that active energy management use. Utilities are more and more shifting to time of use rates. So there is the financial incentive to manage your energy use if you can kind of figure it out from the technology side, right? Like it's not simple to figure out, well, who's going to be monitoring this? What do they do when they see kind of data coming in? But these devices that help us know in real time and not at the end of the month when our utility bills come in are becoming more and more available and are a real opportunity if we can kind of find solutions on that workforce side that promote us having a really great maintenance staff to help operate these high performance buildings. It's a real challenge, but also I think a critical component of how we move forward with really kind of 21st century green building. Are you going for a new question?
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay. I was just saying thank you for both of you putting the workforce issue on the table, both in public and assisted housing. There are a lot of people in those buildings or in those communities who could benefit from getting the training and the skills to operate and manage, these new systems. So not to mention installing solar systems and so on. I think you'll be hearing more from this administration and HUD about that going forward. I think in the Q&A, we can perhaps get to some of the other questions that we thought we might want to present to you, but I'm going to actually ask perhaps a couple of our partners who are with us today, just to give us a real world sense of where you are. We've asked a couple of our partners who have been doing some work in this space just to add to this discussion. I'm going to call on Lauren Zullo from Jonathan Rose. I don't know if you're online, Jonathan. Lauren, there you are. Great to see you.
I'm here. Hi, Michael.
Great to have you with us. So yes, what are the Rose companies doing? I know you've got some great passive house projects in the works, but you're also looking at how you can adopt this goal in your portfolio. So it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for having me, and thanks to Becky and Caitlin. You guys are doing really awesome stuff, so we appreciate the summaries. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing as well. So Jonathan Rose Companies, we are a privately held real estate firm with assets across the whole country. And I think, like so many, we sort of I guess would say, started our climate work focused on energy efficiency and energy. And our initial goals had our reductions kind of in line with the Better Building Summit, a 20% reduction in energy use intensity and a 20% reduction in carbon that we sort of, had running parallel path to our efficiency goals. And then I think, like so many, we started to hear those alarm bells on this climate emergency really sounding. And as we spoke to our executive leadership and as we spoke to our investors within our private equity funds, I think we were hearing just in a much more intense focus on the immediacy of carbon reductions. And so that led us to kind of shift our lens a little bit. And so we dipped our toe into electrification using the low-income weatherization program in California. I think like many with properties there. And that allowed us to kind of get our feet wet with electrification and understanding some of the challenges of and benefits of switching to electrified domestic hot water. We were able to pair that with on-site solar in some of the properties there to help mitigate some of the cost implications. And since then, we've been looking at electrification in other markets. The climate in California is friendly to heating with electric, but in New York, in Boston, that looks a little bit different. And so we're reviewing technologies there, and we're happy to report that technologies are changing really quickly with some of these CO2 water heaters coming online that can operate in colder climates. So we're excited about those. I'd also say, Becky mentioned this, but it's so important. The time of when we use when we use electricity is so important. And that's led us to look at opportunities to pair solar plus storage so that we can control the times that we're using electricity from the grid in a more discrete way. But it's an interesting challenge because, as Becky said, we are not accounting for carbon in that way. So even though we know fundamentally that will have an impact on sort of the overall carbon emissions, it may not be something that we can then report out to investors besides in a narrative form. And then I guess finally, one of the other things we've been doing is around green energy and ensuring that we're supporting the states that are putting responsible green energy policy in place. And so we currently procure RECs to offset all of our electricity consumption. We aim to do that from the markets in which the electricity is actually consumed. And now we're transitioning to more direct procurement of green energy and community solar strategies. So we're pairing this kind of carbon reduction and electricity reduction along with responsible procurement. So lots going on and so many different angles from which to tackle this kind of meaty project. There was one other question that came up about Local Law 97 and whether it includes Scope 3 emissions. I would say it includes a slice of Scope 3 emissions. It does look at whole building energy consumption and calculates your carbon emissions associated with that. So any Scope 3 emissions associated with tenant electricity use is captured, but not the sort of additional activities like commuting or waste. So that's it for me. I'll turn it back to you, Michael. I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you. Thank you. If you could stay on the line in case there's some questions, we hopefully can throw them your way. So we also wanted to hear, we have a lot of housing authorities who are part of the Better Buildings Challenge, some of whom are really doing pioneering work. The King County Housing Authority in the Pacific Northwest, Scott Percival. Is Scott with us?
I am. Hi, how are you?
Great. Scott, you want to give us a quick update on where King County is at?
Sure.
And any reactions to what you've heard so far?
Yeah, we are in a really interesting point with regards to addressing carbon at KCHA, because we just finished, or this year we will be finishing a 5-year sustainability action plan. And that plan was the first plan that had a carbon target in it. It was a 5% reduction for the energy at our buildings, the whole property perspective. So it did not account for a lot of the other sources of carbon in the operations of the agency. But during that time, we did start to estimate what that and what the greenhouse gases and carbon looks like for other sectors of our work, including transportation. And so we're preparing ourselves just through gathering that data to be able to try to set targets for other emission sources beyond energy consumption at our properties. So we're really looking forward to bringing that to turn into real targets. Also at that time, I'm looking at this with a bit of a kind of a silver lining. We were hit with some wildfires on the West Coast. Really, it's been the last 4 years, but last summer in King County, the air quality got so poor, and coupled with COVID, it really put our residents in some pretty tough situations where they couldn't really go to the gathering spaces that they're used to because of COVID. They couldn't really step outside because air quality was so bad. So they were very much stuck in their units, which was obviously far from ideal. So it has been an opportunity to start talking about how do we decarbonize and address some of these impacts of climate change at our buildings. So, naturally, heat pumps have become really important to us to make sure that the units are comfortable in what other kind of weather, especially if you can't step outside due to bad air quality. It's also been useful in connecting how our core mission of housing vulnerable populations is going to be more challenging because of the effects of climate change, and how we have a obligation to lessen our impact on climate change while also preparing for the effects of climate change at our properties. So with that, we're looking at solutions that really address both. So solar has been a great tool for us, not only in decarbonizing our grid, but really making our properties more resilient to when there may be some outages. We're also looking at ways to recover as much energy as possible just to make our buildings run as efficiently as possible. But even beyond that, when we're looking at lessening our impacts, just the ability to measure our transportation, commuting habits to and from work, what's going on with our fleet of vehicles, any sort of work-based travel, and capturing that and just getting a sense of what that looks like has been a really important part of this conversation that is leading to reduction goals. Without having that information, I think it would be a pretty difficult starting point to talk about this with our senior staff, because the significance of it isn't really that clear to them. And so when we have this data, even if it's not perfect, as long as we follow a pretty consistent methodology, it's easy to demonstrate that there's a path to reduction and that this is significant. So I'm really glad that we had already started that work, and we have about 3 years of that kind of comprehensive data to work with to guide us in our next sustainability plan and setting goals and targets there.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. That sounds like great work, and we'll be following the progress. We wanted to quickly hear from one more partner, Mark Pachelski with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, San Francisco. They have been a leader in this space. I think you're also part of the low carbon pilot, I think. Mark, if you're still with us.
I am.
Great, great. Maybe you could give us a quick.
I'll do my best. So thank you, Michael, for having me.
We've got some background screen here. Not quite sure.
Can you hear me okay?
No, we can hear you. I'm just looking at the visual that we have.
My camera was going a little goofy there.
Okay.
Hi, there we go. Hi, everybody. So I joined TNDC about a year ago as their director of facilities, and Ruchi Shah and Magdalena Shizmanska did a bulk of the work of sustainability. Sustainability is part of the facilities department. And so when I came in, it was to pick up the mantle and keep moving forward with sustainability. So I want to echo something that Scott mentioned, because this was a concern of ours as well, is the fires and the COVID. And we have competing needs for our tenants as well. And that's been a big challenge, because the prescription for both of those issues are polar opposites. And so we're looking at new technologies to try to create one prescription. If you have fires, you typically want to put your building into a recirc. You want to pull in less air. For a pandemic, you want to pull in more air. And so we have these conflicting issues that are happening on a global level, from the climate crisis to a pandemic. And currently those prescriptions are different. So we're looking at new technologies for that. I also want to talk about what Becky had alluded to in terms of control systems. Now, a lot of the multifamily housing that we build, we're now starting to incorporate control systems into the scope of work, where we're trying to create a base foundation so that we can start expanding those control systems through capital improvement projects over the course of many years. For that very reason, is so that we can have some micro measurements that we can start making quality business decisions on. We all know the phrase, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so measurement and analytics are a big part of how we want to move forward, so we can really understand and target our initiatives. We're a nonprofit organization, as you know, money is everything. So it's important for us to get that data so we can really pinpoint where we can get the most impact. Within our housing development department also, we're looking at sourcing materials that have a low carbon imprint. Of course, high ash concrete, for instance, laminate wood beam construction, and other aspects of the construction field that can also start the process of reducing carbon right when we start digging into the ground. And that should be carried through the life of the building. But there's so much to consider when you're looking at sourcing products: how it's transported, how it's created, how it's manufactured, how it's installed. There's a lot of information that has to be acquired to start looking at what really makes the most sense. And so we've been pushing as a leader in this industry for many, many years. We've reached our first goal of reducing emissions by 20%. And now we have a new goal, which is by 2038, we want to have a 50% reduction portfolio-wide. And I think we're on track to doing that. We have a lot of support in housing development, a lot of support with leadership. We have some challenges, certainly with local authorities that aren't up to speed on the new technologies. As fast as the technologies are coming out, there has to be some sort of communication between how those technologies impact in the aspect of building inspections and aspect of codes and compliance, because we're running some problems on that front with local authorities who have jurisdiction over certain things, right? So that's one of the challenges that we're currently dealing with. And then, the other aspect is, we deal with very old buildings, and what Caitlin was talking about is There's a big challenge of taking an old building that wasn't constructed with the mindset of green technologies. You know, when I deal with a building that was, constructed in 1906, there's a certain level of challenges that we have to face to get that building into a scenario. And a lot of the challenges comes right from the local authorities having jurisdiction over those properties. If you take into account, if I have a historic building, I have a group that is concerned with ruining the historic facade of this building, which might entail us not being able to do any windows. So there's a lot of challenges we face. And yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can go on. It's such a
Great.
topic.
Lots to talk about. Great work, but we're going to have to try to move forward. Thank you. Thank you for the work. I'm just thinking, if we could, thank you all of the panelists. I wanted to get some resources that you might want to look at up on the screen for the next slide, if possible. These are just some of the resources that have been talked about today. We'll be posting these slides on the screen on the web later. And so there'll be some good follow-up resources available here. We also wanted to mention, before wrapping up today, I want to thank all of the speakers and the panelists for participating. I don't know if we have time for additional questions, but we did want to mention the Better Building Solutions Center, which is a key resource for Better Buildings partners. And we encourage you to go to that site for information, both on this topic as well as other topics. So Becca, do we have that video? I think we have a short video.
All right, thank you. It's amazing what you can do with a marketing budget. Just a reminder to sign up for the other multifamily sessions in the summit, which are going to be listed here. Also, we'd like to invite you to attend our Better Buildings Summer webinar series starting in June. Partners will discuss some of the most pressing topics you're facing, share best practices and innovative new approaches to energy performance. To register, go to the Better Buildings Solutions Center and click on Events and Webinars. Last slide. With that, I would like to thank our panelists, Kranti, Ethan, Caitlin, and Becky very much for taking the time to be with us today. And also a big thank you to our Zoom hosts, Becca and Marissa. We've launched a short feedback survey in Slido, and asked that you please take a couple minutes to give us feedback on this session. Your answers will be totally invisible to other attendees. We would rely on your feedback to design webinars, future summits, and more. The poll will be open until tomorrow morning. If you'd like to learn more about the resources discussed today, please check out the Better Buildings Solutions Center or feel free to contact me at the email shown. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.